Welcome to Biztech's C-Suite Conversation Show. Our guest for today is Riddhi Dutta. He's the Regional Vice President for ASEAN and South Asia at Backbase. Now, Backbase has created a category-leading engagement banking platform that helps banks and credit unions power the full customer lifecycle through a single white label platform. Now, that seems like a lot, but to tell us more, Riddhi, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks for having me here. Really looking forward to the discussion.
Now, Riddhi, for a start, could you give us an overview of Backbase and its history?
Sure. Backbase, now we have been around for almost 20 years now, so we are not that young anymore. We were founded by our current CEO, Joop Pleiter, in Amsterdam in the Netherlands. And the space that we operate in, as you mentioned, is engagement banking. In fact, we pride ourselves to be in a sense, the pioneer as well as the authority in terms of engagement banking. Essentially, what we're trying to do is, banks, financial services, and in markets where credit unions do operate, we are trying to help them craft very seamless and intuitive user journeys for their customers as well as their internal employees, right? So that's what Backbase essentially does, and we will probably delve a little bit deeper into it as we go along.
Okay, and what does your footprint look like in the Asia Pacific region?
Yeah, so I'll just probably weave it down from where we are globally, and then we'll tie into Asia Pacific, right? So if you look at Backbase internally, we are more than 2,000 odd people right now at this point of time. That's spread across 22 offices in 14 different countries. And interestingly, within these 2,000 people, we have more than 65 different nationalities. So it's a very diverse organization, and that sort of goes to show in the way we go out and talk to our prospects, customers, and partners in the market as well. If you look at within Asia Pacific, globally right now we are working with more than 150 different financial institutions. But if I just break it down to Asia Pacific today, our headcount right now is north of 500. So we have more than 500 people in Asia Pacific. That's split between Singapore, which is obviously our regional headquarters, and then we have a decent presence going on in countries like India, Vietnam, Philippines, Malaysia. And also in Australia, which is also a very big hub for us, right? So we have 500 odd people across these different locations. From a customer standpoint perspective, we are within the region. We are today working with roughly around 20 odd customers. Again, different shape, different size, different forms, and equally spread across some of the countries in broader Asia Pacific as we speak.
Okay, so Riddhi, give us some insights into some of the customers that you've helped in the Asia Pacific region.
Yeah. So before I do that, Brian, it's a little bit important to understand, what we do, because that will sort of weave into how we help customers, right? Now, essentially, as I said, it's this one single white label platform, which helps unify all sorts of customer, employee, any end user journey that a bank or a financial institution has. What we're trying to do here is cut through a lot of internal silos, internal processes that banks have, and see how we can orchestrate beyond all the obvious challenges that legacy banks today have built over the years. Now, while trying to do that, today in the region, as I said, we are working with banks of different shape, size, and form. So we are working with tier 1 banks in countries like Philippines, Vietnam, Australia, and India. And with these tier 1 banks, these incumbent banks, what we are really helping them do is, can I help them, or can we as Backbase help them increase their digital customer base from what they are today to probably 2x or 3x of what they want to be, right? And essentially why we're trying to do that is the more digital customers that they have, their cost to service a customer goes down drastically, right? So that's the metric that we're trying to help some of the tier 1 banks. Some of the slightly small, sorry, is there a question? Yeah.
Yes, I was going to ask you, with these tier 1 banks, there are two approaches, isn't it? One approach is to literally set up a separate digital bank as a digital arm, branded differently.
Yep.
Is that where your sweet spot comes in terms of really helping them go after those new digital customers?
Interestingly, we operate in both the places. We help tier 1 banks in their legacy business as well. And at the same time, we are also helping the neos, if I may use the term.
Yep.
Whether it's a standalone neo or whether it's an incumbent which is trying to launch an offshoot as a pure digital only brand. We have customers across the spectrum as we speak, Brian.
And also in a tier one bank, and in some of the countries that you mentioned, you have clients. Many of them have legacy banking solutions, a myriad, enormous amount of different applications. So one of the things that you probably help them with very quickly is by using a one-stop solution, you are enabling them to stop using 10 different applications that they've been using previously. Am I correct? And that's really the value proposition that
that's definitely one of the strong value propositions. But the other strong value proposition, Brian, is what you alluded to. They are using a lot of legacy solutions. And McKinsey had this two-speed architecture that they came up with a few years back, where one speed is something like your backend systems, your core banking systems, if I may use the term, which are supposed to run in a slow and steady manner, right? Like a turtle or a tortoise, the story that we have heard about.
Yes.
But then you need applications on top of that, which has a higher tempo, higher speed, which can change, which are flexible. And that's where something like Backbase comes in, because we are that platform which is agile, modern, with intuitive experiences, and something which can change at very rapid speed, thus enabling banks help deliver the customer experience and the customer journeys that they're looking forward to.
Now, this obviously businesses like yourself, the pandemic really accelerated growth because many banks around the world, and Biztech, there's an old interview that we've done with the CIO Association of India, together with the financial services industry, which basically said that it forced many banks to adopt solutions like Backbase in order to engage the customers, because the customers couldn't come to the branches.
Yeah, very true. And I can give you a metric from a customer of ours itself in the Philippines, again, a tier one bank out there, Brian. Just within the pandemic, in probably 12 months, the number of customers that they had on their digital channels literally doubled. Okay. Now, yes, they give credit to their underlying infrastructure, their underlying applications, because they were ready for it, because they were ready to take that load, that huge volume that came in. But essentially what happened is, as I was mentioning earlier, because the volume of customers on their digital channels doubled, their cost to serve went down. And in the Philippines, in the market that they were serving, they started becoming pointed out as probably the best bank during the COVID pandemic, which customers could get service from, because there were no branches, there were no people that you could reach out to. Everything was digital. And out there, this bank was doing it more seamlessly without going down, unlike some of its competitors who were really struggling to keep the lights on and at the same time serve their customers. So COVID and the pandemic definitely helped, but I think it was just an excuse, if I may use the term, right? Because it had to happen. This sort of digital shift, this sort of digital transformation had to happen. COVID just provided an acceleration to all of it.
Because one of the key things, and as you say, I'm going to add to what you said in terms of the had to happen. There are studies that have shown with a number of consulting companies that many banks in Southeast Asia, legacy banks, are at least 20 to 30% overstaffed.
Yeah.
Is that what you're seeing now in the market in 2023?
Very interesting point, Brian. I was in Bangkok earlier this week, and I was with a very big bank, and we were talking about some of their internal processes. Okay, and it came out that this particular bank has, you wouldn't believe, more than 3,000 people sitting in their back office centralized operations group doing a lot of manual approvals. Right now, we are not advocating at any point of time that you let go of people. That's not what we are saying. All we are saying is, can the same set of people do something which will add more value to the bank, add more revenue, add more top line, and reduce their cost to serve? And that is essentially where platforms like Backbase come in. It's not just about reducing your cost, but it's also about how do you increase your top line? How do you increase your loyalty? How do you acquire more customers in a better and digital manner? And as you said, right, it's just way too many people which are doing jobs that is not adding real value to a bank.
And you talk about adding real value. It's about increasing your net promoter score, isn't it? At the end of the day, banks in the past, and it's even in mature economies like Singapore, where in the past banks have been criticized perhaps not being at the top of their games in terms of customer service. with solutions that improve the whole customer journey, obviously that net promoter score and customer satisfaction goes up dramatically.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's very simple things. You don't need to really boil the ocean. Very simple things like when you really need a transaction to happen, is the transaction going through, right? It's not about, and that is the basics of customer experience. Can I do what I need to do at the place where I am, and can the bank deliver that particular service to me? Now imagine if I'm in a mall and trying to make a payment and the payment doesn't go through, that leads to frustration, that leads to lowering of your net promoter score. As simple as that, right? It's not about very jazzy interfaces. That's not what digital is all about. Digital is about simplification. It's about giving the customer what they want, where they are in their context. And that leads to something called as, personalization, hyper personalization, but that's a slightly more broader topic. But absolutely on complete agreement with you, Brian, on that one.
Now, Riddhi, you talked about helping not just tier 1 banks, but again, tier 2 banks, credit institutions, and so forth. Give us a sense of what the market needs are in Southeast Asia right now.
So if you look at it again, different banks have, depending on the size and shape, have different needs. Tier 1 banks are looking at more and more, flexibility. They are looking at more and more control because they have leapfrogged some of the other banks in terms of the basics. The basic foundations are in the place. So they're looking at platforms, technologies, which can give them the flexibility and control that they could really operate them like their own with their own people. If you go a little bit below tier 2, tier 3 and credit, the smaller, let's say non-banking financial institutions, they're still looking at more and more complete outsourcing. That is there somebody who could come in and run this, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's applications, cloud, everything. I would just give it all of you to one single partner, and can they run it for me? Because a tier 2, tier 3 bank does not have the amount of people that is required to do all of that, right?
Already, one of the key problems there is in many markets in Southeast Asia, that's not possible. The regulatory framework does not allow you to do that. So how do you get around this?
It's a very interesting question, Brian. Interestingly, yeah, there are some regulators who have been a little bit more open and they have said, okay, cloud is a good thing to do, go ahead. But then there are certain regulators who have been a little bit on the fence. But there's not a single regulator today, Brian, in Southeast Asia, which is saying, do not do it. All that they're saying is, if you want to do it, please come to us for an approval with a proper justification. And more often than not, regulators are approving. So any country you take it, whether it's Vietnam, whether it's Thailand, whether it's Malaysia, even Indonesia for that matter, they are all having these sort of complete managed services engagements on cloud that are taking a lot of bandwidth away from tier 2, tier 3 banks. So it's not black and white. It's a little bit gray, but I think it's still allowed at the end of the day if the bank has a proper justification.
Now, Riddhi, I want to ask you about because you have a lens that's a global lens as well as a regional lens. What are some key trends and shifts that are happening in banking and financial services globally that we're going to be seeing in 2023, 2024?
Yeah, there's one point there, Brian, and I keep saying it to all my colleagues, even within Backbase and outside, that Asia is probably ahead of the rest of the world when it comes to innovation in banking. When I really see some of the engagements that my peers are doing, let's say in developed countries in Europe, even in the US, they're still at the basics. The banks are still at the basics, while banks in Asia are really innovating ahead of the curve. Right. So I personally believe that what we are seeing in Asia, the rest of the world is probably going to follow later on. Now, essentially what Asia is going through today, and this is a well-known thing that started with Singapore, then with Philippines, Malaysia, even Hong Kong, and now Thailand, is the rise of this complete virtual banks or digital banks. And there's been a lot of discussion around it. Is it good? Is it bad? I personally feel it's a very good move. And it's a good move for whom? It's a good move for the incumbent and the legacy banks. Because these,
that's an interesting insight. Why?
Yeah, it is because the regulators in this case are really forcing the incumbent and the legacy banks to come out of their comfort zone and look at more competition, which could eat into their revenue pie if they do not react. What I'm seeing, let's say, I'll take the example of Malaysia, right? Where last year Bank Negara came out with these digital banking licenses. More than the new 5 banks that are coming up, it's the incumbent banks who are reacting and doing much more to completely change the way they operate. And it's a common trend. We saw that in the Philippines. We are seeing it in Malaysia. I'm expecting it to happen in Thailand also, where Bank of Thailand is expected to come out with these new virtual banks. And it is good for those incumbent banks and their customers, because now they will get possibly what they want.
So here's the interesting phenomena, because and let's talk about, say, markets like Malaysia and Philippines. So in Philippines and Malaysia, you have large underbanked and unbanked population, which the incumbents have not tackled. But with the rise of new banks like Rise in Malaysia, which is Al Rajhi Bank, they've taken a different approach. They said, we're going to just look after this digital bank, is going to look at new customers only. We take care of our existing customers with the existing bank.
Yeah.
And that will enable them really to just open up business and enlarge the overall pie.
Absolutely. And it's one part is the unserved and the underserved. The second part is within that, which category or which persona of customers are you going after? Any bank, any advisory, the big fours, the consulting partners you talk to, Brian, they will continuously tell you, we have a very clear strategy for the retail customers. We have a very clear strategy for the large corporates and wholesale banking customers. There is a sweet spot in between, which is the SMEs and the MSMEs. And that is, again, some of these digital banks are targeting very well. Again, within Malaysia, without naming, I know 2 of those 5 digital banks are going all in for SMEs and MSMEs as their target segment. They are not looking at mass retail. They are not looking at large corporates. They're looking at very innovative banking solutions that SMEs and MSMEs could look forward to. So it's the underserved plus the SMEs and MSMEs which are going to benefit from this rise of digital banks.
So then how do then the challenger fintechs, and I use the word challenger fintechs so deliberately because a few years ago, everyone was afraid of the fintechs.
Yeah.
Now that fear has dissipated somewhat. So peer-to-peer lending, for example, was something that has only taken shape in very few markets in the region.
Yeah.
Malaysia is an example of where peer-to-peer lending has been very, very successful in the SME space, and also in particular spaces within the SME space, like vehicle financing.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on this, and how banks should respond, and how solutions like you can help perhaps a challenger that's setting up shop?
Yeah. So see, I think you gave the answer to a certain extent yourself, Brian, because few years back, fintechs were looked at as competition. Today, you go and talk to any bank, they'll say, no, they are not competition. We are coexisting, right? We need each other. And without a bank, they are not sufficient. And without them, we are not sufficient. So the partnership mode has definitely come in. Banks do realize that they need fintechs to offer more that their customers are looking forward to. Where we come in, very interestingly, is because there are all these fintechs are very good at doing one particular thing, right? Somebody is doing, as you said, P2P lending very well. Somebody is probably doing transaction categorization very well, right? There are fintechs which are doing, let's say, document analysis very well. But a bank cannot have all these fintechs doing their things in isolation, because the more you add on, the more silos you again keep on creating, unfortunately. And that is where platforms like Backbase come in, because these platforms really derive value from all these multiple fintechs, aggregate them in one single place, and then consolidate them into one single unified experience for end customers and internal employees, right? So that entire unification of value of data is where platforms like Backbase come in very handy, from both within the bank's internal systems as well as these third-party fintechs, which are a must-have to survive these days.
Now, Riddhi, it's been a fascinating conversation. I really enjoyed and learned a lot from you. But before we leave, any final thoughts you'd like to leave the audience with?
I think, Brian, it's what I keep on saying to people that I meet these days is that change is a constant. And for banks also, and especially more to incumbent and legacy banks, right? Because they need to change more than anybody else. They need to look at change as not just a new way of doing old things, but completely rip and replace. Only then incumbent banks are going to be able to be competitive in the new age, where digital banks, fintechs, all of them are going to come more aggressively after their revenue, after their customer base. So, and when I say rip and replace, it's not about just completely throwing away what they have, but looking at things with a different perspective, with a different mindset, and not just trying to put a skin on top of what they have right now. I think that's very important. That's what we keep on educating as well. And if incumbent and legacy banks are able to move towards that journey, end of the day, end customers like you and me are only going to benefit out of this.
Now, Riddhi, I really enjoyed this. Thank you very much for taking your time to be on the show.
Thanks, Brian. My pleasure.
We've been speaking to Riddhi Dutta, the Regional Vice President, ASEAN and South Asia at Backbase. I'm Brian Fernandez, and you've been watching and listening to Biztech's C-Suite Conversation Show. This interview will be on our website, www.biztech.asia, as well as our social media platforms. It'll also be on our syndication partners, TV stations, radio stations, and websites. Thanks a lot for tuning in.